It's time to tackle part 2 of the Lyrical Monasterio set review, and this time things might not be as they seem, as the battlefield is an ever-changing landscape. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey fighters, welcome back to part 2 of this set review for Lyrical Monasterio. Last time we talked about all the generic stuff, and this time we're going to tackle 2 of the 6 ride lines, and we're going to focus on the multi-attack ride lines, and mainly the ride lines that allow you to change the battlefield mid-battle and then call new units to the field. So you already can guess which ride lines we're going to tackle, as we're going to tackle Kairi's ride line as well as Feltyrosa. And we're going to jump straight into the cards for Feltyrosa, because some of the ghosty cards can also be used for Kairi. So with that said, let's jump straight into the Feltyrosa ride line herself, and we're gonna immediately jump into the grade 1 because we already covered all the grade 0s as generic starters in part 1. So here we have the grade 1, Beautiful Day of Feltyrosa. And this Feltyrosa has the abilities: auto, when this unit is rode upon, cost Soul Blast 1, choose up to 1 ghost in your drop and put it into your hand. So this basically allows you to negate the discard cost for your ride line. And since it's rode upon until up to the grade 2, that means you have 2 turns to set up at least 1 ghost in your drop, which is long enough to actually get a card that you then can get back. So it's basically a +1, which is nice because you want to get those ghosties onto the board because they help you to set up your game plan, and as well as with the grade 2 of the ride line, but we're going to tackle that one in a moment. Then also her other skills: auto and Vanguard and rearguard circle. During your turn, if you have a ghost on your rearguard circle, this unit gets power plus 2k. So she can become a 10k attacker or booster. This ability will only come up as a Vanguard unit because you're probably not gonna run her in the main deck, as she herself is not a ghost, which is kind of annoying. So there's no real need to actually run her there. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Like, this is pretty generic as a ride line grade 1. It gives you a plus, maybe get a little bit power, but doesn't really do anything special besides that. Then if we move up to the grade 2, we see Talent of Enjoyment Feltyrosa, and her abilities are auto. When this unit is rode upon, cost, reveal a ghost, normal unit from your hand, and put it on the top of your deck. Choose a ghost from your drop and put it into your hand. So once again, we can grab ghosts from our drop zone, which are basically the cards we can discard for a right deck, but we can put any card from our hand that's a ghost on top of the deck. Now that might sound bad because they're probably normal units, but there are also, I believe, some trigger cards that have the ghosty race type. But the main thing that this card allows us to do is to set up for our grade 3 Feltyrosa, which allows us to multi-attack with these cards. And the fact that we can put any type of ghost from our hand onto the top of the deck, we can actually set up the most perfect situation for our multi-attack shenanigans, which makes this a really good card to set up your very first grade 3 turn. But on top of that, Feltyrosa also has the effect continuous of Vanguard and rearguard circle. During your turn, if you have 3 or more ghosts on your rearguard circle, this unit gets power plus 5k. Now, this ability won't come up all too often, as again, we're not really running her in the main deck, so she won't really be a rearguard. And even as a Vanguard, it's kind of restricted because it means you need to dedicate a lot of cards in your early game to the field to actually get the power increase. Is that worth it? Depends on the situation. It can come up here and there, but it's not the most consistent thing that will matter. Overall, I think her main ride line effect is really good, and that grants her, for me at least, already a 4-star status. Because being able to set up your multi-attacks and actually making use of the ghosty cards in your hand is actually really good. Because a lot of the ghost cards are pretty dead cards in your hand, because they either need to be placed during the battle phase via a skill, or they need to do something that allows you to generate value. And some of them don't really generate it anymore if they're in your hand. So this is a great way to at least get the value out of those cards, even in those situations. And now if we move up to the grade 3, we've got Rondeau of Duskmoon Feltyrosa. And this grade 3 Feltyrosa has the simple ability: auto and Vanguard circle. When your drive check reveals a ghost, normal unit, you may call that unit to an open front row rearguard circle. Then, if you called, cost counter plus 1, and this unit gets drive plus 1 until the end of battle. So this allows us to multi-attack with our ghosty cards, because every time we drive check a ghosty, we can call to an open front row rearguard circle and then keep drive checking. And thanks to the counterblast addition to this skill, we don't lose out on card value as long as we can pay the counterblast. This is actually really good because it allows Feltyrosa to potentially dish out 4 to 5 attacks every single turn, and thanks to the grade 2 of the ride line, allows it to set up for this particular card, at least for the very first grade 3 turn, which is great. Now overall for me, this Feltyrosa is also going to get a 4-star rating. This card is very conditional, very restricted to actually the rest of the cards that are present in the field, because if we do not have cards that can clear themselves, this card won't really do as much. If we don't drive check normal ghost units, this card won't really do as much. So there are definitely some restrictions to this card and some RNG elements attached to it. So that's why I don't really can give her a 5-star rating, because she's also a bit of glass cannony in the fact that you're wasting a lot of resources to just put up a lot of pressure, but to some extent also sacrificing defensive capabilities for it. So that's why it's a good card, but there's definitely some flaws built in the card itself. But to actually understand Feltyrosa's true power, we have to take a look at all the ghosty cards that surround her, because those are the cards that we're going to play with, and it allows us to Feltyrosa to actually multi-attack. So first off, we're going to tackle the grade 1s, and one of those grade 1s being this one, Fulfill Suite's Anselma. And Anselma has the effect Auto and Back Row Rearguard Circle. Once a turn, when your auto unit is placed in a rearguard circle during your battle phase, cost Soul plus 2 and draw a card. So this is a draw engine. Soul plus 2 is kind of heavy, especially since we already use 1 soul of the right line, and we have another card that uses a lot of soul that's really good. So this card is kind of iffy and might come up here and there, but overall I will only give it 2 stars. Like, this can be a tech choice, but this is definitely not a staple card for the deck. Now another grade 1 that we've got for the ghosty archetype is Fleeting Maiden Hanarore, and Hanarore has the effect Auto Rearguard Circle. When your other rearguard is placed on the same column as this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. So basically 10k booster. You can call something, she gains plus 2k, and then during the battle phase, if that unit removes itself, you can call another one with Feltyrosa's ability and she gains another 2k, so it becomes 12k. Not really anything special because she can only boost 1, so you cannot get extra value of the power gain, and becoming either a 10 or 12k booster doesn't really change all too much. Like, the 1 2k, yes, can change from a grade 3 13k into a 23k, that matters, but the extra 2k on top of that won't really change anything besides that with any other card. So this is a bit iffy. Overall, it's going to be a 1-star for me because we have better 10k boosters that probably will do more, and calling her off the skill doesn't really do anything besides just being an 8k, which is not great. So for me, this is going to be a 1-star. Now we got another grade 1, which is actually pretty decent, as we have Little Lady Helmina, which has a skill Auto. When she is placed on a rearguard circle, if you have another ghost on the rearguard circle, choose one of your rearguards and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So this allows you to just give extra power to the board, and the 5k increase is much better than the other 2k that we just talked about. But the great thing about this is that we can call it from our hand, give one of our attackers plus 5k, meaning it can attack on its own. If it then disappears, we can then keep the rearguard in the back row standing, so it can stand or boost the following unit that's going to be superior called with Feltyrosa, which is a bit more flexible. And at the same time, this can also activate off of Feltyrosa, and then you can just give herself an extra 5k because it doesn't restrict it that you need to give another rearguard to 5k power, so that this is also pretty flexible. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's definitely going to be in a grade 1 lineup, as it just a solid target to call from hand or call Feltyrosa to her own effect. Now another very solid grade 1 is Joining Class Eresta, and Ernesta has the effect Auto and Back Row Rearguard Circle. When your other ghost is placed on a rearguard circle during the battle phase, stand this unit. So this is a restander that allows you to just boost both attacks, which is great. And if we combine it with the grade 1 we just talked about, we can actually give this card the extra 5k power, and now she becomes a 13k booster for both attacks, which is pretty good. So for me, this is going to be a solid 4-star card. This is probably one of the go-to grade 1s that you want to have on the board, because it allows you to just generate more power and more value throughout the entirety of the turn. Then if we move up to the grade 2s, we have Bodyguards Captain Marlene, and Marlene has the effect continues a rearguard circle and guardian circle. If you have 3 or more ghosts on rearguard circle, this unit gets power plus 2k and shield plus 5. So she can become a 12k attacker also during your opponent's turn, and a 10k interceptor or shield. This is fine, it's just higher numbers, but it doesn't really do all too much. So for me, it's going to be a 2-star. It's not all too crazy, but you're probably going to play her because he's a ghost unit and it's just raw stats, which is never really bad, but we can always do something better. Then another grade 2 that we've got is Sweet Tone Cream Milled, and Cream Milled has the effect Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit is placed in the rearguard circle during your battle phase, cost, soul +1, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is an 8k base that can become 18k if called via Feltyrosa's effect for a soul blast. Now, that doesn't sound all too bad, but this is going to be a 1-star for me for the main reasons that 1, it costs a soul, which we're going to use for other very powerful skills, so you don't really want to waste on this particular skill. And more importantly, this card is completely vanilla and a weaker vanilla because it's 8k base in every situation except if it's drove checked by Feltyrosa. If you draw this card, it's basically a dead card at that point, which is really annoying because it means it doesn't really do anything. And even during a Feltyrosa drive check, if you don't have soul, it's still a vanilla card, which is still not that great. So there are too many restrictions to this card where it is a 1-star for me, and you're probably never gonna play this particular card. Now, another grade 2, which is a lot better, is Longing Tied Up Hell Week. And Hell Week has the effect, although when the unit is placed in the regular circle during your battle phase, put the unit into your soul and draw a card. So this is actually a great way to just generate more value, because you can call this off of Feltyrosa. It puts herself into soul, you draw a card, which means you don't lose out on value, you actually gain soul, and you keep drive checking with Feltyrosa, which then can potentially get a better unit onto the circle where you just called Hell Week to. And if it's a unit that uses soul, you immediately just generate the soul that you needed to activate that skill, which is actually really great. So for me, this is going to be a solid 3-star card. Now, this card does have the same restrictions as the grade 2 that we just talked about, that it needs to be called via the battle phase, but at the very least, the payout of this particular card is much better than that particular card. So therefore, I think this is still a reasonable card to just run, because if you hit this card, it actually generates decent amount of value. But with that card discussed, now we actually start into the actual meaty, good ghosty cards. As first off, we've got this grade 2 that's called Dedicated Serenade Eleonore. And Eleonore has the effect on the regular circle when this unit attacks, costs soul +2, and this unit gets power plus 15k until the end of that battle. At the end of the battle, put this unit on top of your deck. This is the reason why your soul is so important, because you want to use it for this card. This is a 25k beater on her own, which means you don't have to boost her, and then she puts herself on the top of the deck, which means you're immediately going to call her back to the field with Feltyrosa effect, which is really good, because that means you're gonna get double the value. And if you can use her effect again, you can put her on the top of the deck again. But I wouldn't recommend it in that scenario, because it means she's gonna be your damage check, which isn't that ideal. And if we combine this with the grade 2 of the right line Feltyrosa, that means we can actually set up both our targets for our very first grade 3 turn, because we can set up any type of ghost on the top of her deck, then call this card to the field, use her effect, which she then puts herself on top of the deck, and with Feltyrosa's Twin Drive, you're gonna call those two particular cards back to the field, which is great. And that's also an important thing about this particular card, is she puts herself away from the field. So you have space to call a new ghosty to, which she probably gonna be yourself because she's on the top of the deck. But if for some reason you shuffle the deck mid resolving this before you're gonna drive check with the Vanguard, you have a new open space in the front door, which is great. So for me, this is a solid 4-star card. The only thing that's against her is the 2 soul. The 2 soul is pretty hefty, which means you need to dedicate a lot of resource to actually be able to use her multiple times. But if you can manage to pull her off, she's gonna help your engine considerably. Now, if we move up to grade 3s, we got a grade 3 that is decent, but still has some annoying restrictions attached to her, as we've got Adoration Intensifying in Heart, Florenzia. And Florenzia has the effect, although when the unit is placed on the regular circle other than from hand, until the end of turn, when your opponent would call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle for the battle this unit attacked, they must call 2 or more at the same time. So if she's superior called from the drop zone, or from deck, or from damage zone, or whatever, except from hand, you are going to get the Battle Door effect on this skill. Now, it's not bad, but the problem is, in the Feltyrosa deck, it means it needs to specifically be drove checked to actually get this skill off, which has the same issues as the grade 2 that we already discussed. But the payout isn't bad, so because of that I will grant her 2 stars. but I don't really see her actually being played because she's a bit too unreliable at this stage. Now moving up to other grade 3s which are actually really good, we've got Selfie, Practice, and Elis, and Anneliese has the effect auto Rigor Circle. At the end of the battle this unit attacked while boosted, cause put this unit into your soul, choose one of your rear guards and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. This is perfect for Feltyrosa. Not only will it go into the soul, which gives you soul that you need for the other grade 2, it clears the board, which allows you to call something there, but it also gives power to the board. If on the other column you have the grade 1 that can restand itself, you can give the power to that grade 1, which then starts to become a very beefy booster, which is actually pretty decent. Or if it's not there, you can give it to the attacker, which means the attacker can attack without needing to rely on the boost, which makes the deck more consistent in just power output, which is great. This is an amazing card that just generates a lot of value. The only issue that I have with this particular card is that it's 12k base and it needs to be boosted, which means the next card that's going to be called in this spot won't have access to the booster unless it's the booster that resent herself, which means you need to rely on more pieces. So with it in mind, I think it's still a solid 4-star card because this card, interesting enough, can also work in other decks because he's still very generic, and that might come up here. Now, as for the final support card for Feltyrosa, we've got this grade 3 Capriccio of Circulation Star, Ingrid. And this card is insane. This is probably the most important card for Feltyrosa, as her effects are auto. When this unit is placed in the rearguard circle, other than from hand, counter charge 1. Choose one of your other rearguards in the same column and stand it. So this not only counter charges us, which gives us more resources, but it allows us to stand the unit. So if we combine it with the grade 3 that we just talked about, it needs to be boosted. Now we can restand that booster even if it's that double R grade 1 booster that can restand herself, which is pretty good. But of course it has the same restrictions where it can only activate if it's going to be called a Feltyrosa's effect, which is a bit annoying. But luckily she also has another effect which can work even if we call her from hand, which is auto rearguard circle. When its unit attacks, this unit gets power plus 5k, so it becomes an 18k attacker until the end of the battle. At the end of the battle, put this unit on the bottom of your deck. So this card clears herself from the field, which means you have another open spot that then can be used to superior call. And as soon as she can become a solid 18k attacker without needing to be boosted, that booster can stay standing, so you can get more value for the multi-attack itself. This is pretty good. The only downside to this particular skill is that you need to resolve it if you attack. So you're gonna lose her no matter what. So, interesting enough, you want to call her from hand because she can clear the board, which is great. But you also want to call her off of the drive check because that gives you a counter charge and it resets a unit. But if you then attack with her, she also clears the board, which means you lose this board clear for next turn. Which is a bit awkward, but overall the value she generates is pretty good and it's going to be one of the staples for Feltyrosa. So it's going to be a solid 5-star card for me because this card is pretty damn good. Now, with those cards discussed, we talked about all the Feltyrosa and Ghost support cards. So let's take a look at the trial deck ride line, the Esthesize one with Kairi, and see what this bounce mechanic can bring to the nation as a whole. So first off, we're going to tackle the grade 1 of the ride line, which is Esthesize Nanami. And Nanami has the effect, although when the unit is placed in the Vanguard circle, you may choose a grade 1 or less card from your drop and call to the rearguard circle as rest. So this is again one of those +1 skills that we see on most ride lines. Now it's a bit restricted because you need to discard a grade 1 or a trigger for this skill to actually get value, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. And you might think to yourself, why do you want to call a trigger? Well, Kairi is all about bouncing, so you can call the trigger and bounce it later down the line and then have this extra shield value still in hand. So overall, this skill is pretty decent. And then also it has the skill, although when this unit is placed in the rearguard circle, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. 10k booster or attacker, it's fine. I don't know if you're actually going to run her in the main deck, but overall the ride line skill is decent enough that it's a solid 3-star card. It's what we would expect of grade 1s of ride lines. Then if we move up to the grade 2, we see Esthesize Kiora, and Kiora has the effect, auto rearguard circle, when this unit attacks, choose one of your rearguards and you may return it to your hand. So this immediately shows us that we can bounce back that trigger or that grade 1 that we just called to the field with the grade 1, which is great. But she can also be used for just pure aggression because you can just call multiple grade 2s to the field, attack with them, and then immediately bounce them back to your hand so your opponent cannot damage deny you or just attack into them to make you lose as much card advantage as possible. This is a great way to just counteract that, which is always going to be nice. And as soon as it doesn't cost you any resources, is even more of a plus. And then on top of that, she also has a skill continues on rearguard circle. During the battle, this unit is boosted. This unit gets power plus 5k. Again, not sure if this will come up. It can make a 23k column, which is decent and all. but I'm not sure if it's good enough to actually make it to the main deck. Now overall, Kiora is going to be for me a 3-star card because as a right line, it doesn't generate actual value, so it's a bit iffy, but it does promote a certain playstyle, which can be great depending on the player and how they can capitalize on this particular bounce skill. Now if we move up to the grade 3, we got Esthetize Kairi, and Kairi has the effect, auto on Vanguard Circle, when shooting attacks, cost Soul plus 1, choose up to 2 of your rearguards and return them to your hand. So this is just a generic bounce effect. It doesn't generate actual value, but what it does allow us to do is get more value off on blaze effects, or we can just call triggers to the field and bounce them back so we don't lose out on shield value. It makes the deck a bit more flexible, and at the same time we can rush in the early game and then bounce cards back to our hand so we can fix the board so we aren't cluttering the field like we would with other decks. So it's a flexible skill that definitely can come up in certain situations. But then she also has the effect auto on Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked. If you Persona road this turn, choose up to 2 cards from your hand and call them to the rearguard circle in different rows. So this allows us to multi-attack because now we can bounce 2 cards and then call a new column or maybe somewhere a booster to the other column and go from there. This is actually pretty decent, but the only problem is that this is behind the Persona Right restriction, so it's not as consistent. Yes, we had the Persona Right Searcher, which we talked about in part 1, but that isn't a great card. Maybe you want to run it just for Kairi, but I'm not sure if that's actually good enough to make the cut. Overall, Kairi is going to be for me a solid 4-star card. Like, she promotes a very interesting playstyle. She definitely has built-in value, but the fact that she's restricted behind the Persona Right clause makes it a bit more awkward than I liked it to be. Definitely the bouncing opens up more lines of play, and you can definitely extend the calling to potentially generate 5 attacks because yes, she cannot call 2 attackers, but with other cards that we're going to talk about in a moment here, we can actually generate the 5th attack with decent success. So overall, a very good card that can definitely open up a lot of different playstyles because of all the right lines and all the strategies. Kairi is probably the one that's the most generic, which opens up for the most interesting deck options. Now let's take a look at the support cards around Kairi to actually see what we can do. And of course, don't forget we had all the ghosty cards that we already talked about and all those cards that can clear themselves from the field actually synergize really nicely with Kairi to open up one of the other front row attackers. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. We have those grade 3s that can disappear themselves. Now that said, we have this grade 2, Flowering Season Rudy, which has the effect on a rearguard circle. When your rearguard is returned to your hand, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of the turn. Now this sounds pretty good because it can get an extra 5k or 10k during your Kairi turn because you bounce 2 units, so it becomes an 18k attacker. The problem is, however, that's actually not that great because it means she needs to stay on the board, so that means we cannot achieve 5 attacks that turn, as we have an attacker still standing in the front row and she cannot disappear herself from the field, which is a bit awkward. So yes, you have a stronger attacker, but it's not all too great. She can, however, be interesting on the grade 2 turn because you bounce back a unit, she becomes a 13k attacker. If you have a booster behind it, might be decent enough that it actually can do something on your turn 2 play. But if that's the only reason you want to play her, I'm not too sure if that's a good enough reason to do so. Because that means if you do not see her that early on, the rest of the game she's gonna be a reliability, which isn't that good. So overall, for me, it's gonna be a 2-star card. I can see some value in this particular card, but right now, not too much. Now next up we got another grade 1, which is interesting as we got Reliable Senior Ares, and Ares has the effect continues on Guardian Circle. If you have 3 or more open rearguard circles, this unit gets shield plus 10k, so 15k shield. It's similar to Blitz Orders that we see typically. Overall, I'm not too keen on this because you need a free open rearguard circle and usually your field is quite filled. Maybe in the early game this can come up, but besides that, it's a bit iffy. So for me, it's going to be a 2-star card. Like, I don't like it all too much, but it can come up for certain decks that want to be a bit more defensive with Kairi because you can call her, use her to booster, then bounce her back, and in a situation your field gets wiped, you can use this as a better shield target. But besides that, not really anything else. Now another great one that we've got with a awkward base power is Dreaming Eyes Emmeline. And Emmeline has the effect continues a rearguard circle. If you have 3 or more other rearguards, this unit gets power plus 5k. So if you have 4 rearguards, then she becomes a 12k unit, which is decent. It can be a solid attacker or a booster, but the fact that you need to rely on a pretty filled field makes her a bit underwhelming. So for that, I can only give it 2 stars. She will come up, but it has mainly to do with another card and not mainly herself. Now, another great one that we've got is Blue Hair Genius Lysias. And Lysias has the effect, although when unit is placed on a rearguard circle, choose one of your other units and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. Now, this is actually pretty good because You give 10k power, and that's a lot of power that you can give to one of your attackers, and as soon as you can bounce her and call her again, that's another 10k that you can give. The only problem that I have with this card, and the reason why it's only a 2-star, is because if you look at the base power, she's just 3k, which is super awkward, which means you sacrifice all the boosting power of this card to give 10k power to the board, which, if you then look at it, it's actually just plus 5k, because she should have been an 8k booster. Now, sure, you can give the 10k to something else, but the scene is restanding isn't really a thing in most instances. This is kind of awkward. So for me, this is going to be a 2-star. Maybe can come up to a certain degree, especially with the bouncing aspect of Kairi, but yeah, I'm not really seeing it. Now, we also have a grade 2 that's very similar, which is Slight Slump Appel. And Appel has the effect, although when unit's placed in the rearguard circle, costs counter plus 1, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. She's 8k base, so she becomes 18k, which is a decent number. But it's gonna be a 1-star because it costs a counterblast, and I don't like that cost. Like, maybe if it's soul blast, it was fine. Honestly, if it just was on place, could have also been fine. Maybe it was a bit too strong, but I beg to differ. But now that it is a counterblast cost, it's pretty unplayable at this point, because you're gonna waste too many resources to just make this card usable. And then we also got a grade 3, which surprisingly enough is the better among these 3, as we've got Energetic Attendance Selfie, and Selfie is a 10k base grade 3 with the skill, although when unit's placed on the rearguard circle, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the turn. This is the reason why I thought the grade 2 can easily just get the power for free, because the grade 3 can get the power for free. Don't know why they didn't want to give it to the grade 2. Yeah, this is actually pretty decent. This is a 3-star card. Like, this is honestly a solid target for Kairi to just bounce and call, bounce and call, bounce and call, because at the very least there's power behind it. And funny enough, if you use the grade 1, that's a 3k, you can call behind this, making a 23k column, and you can then give it another 10k, so it's now a 33k column. So you can bounce it, call it, and it's a 33. So you can call them, it's a 33, bounce it, call it again, and it's another 33 column. Now the thing is, if you do that, you do not promote multi-attack, so that's the reason why I think it's more balanced, because if you call other cards, you can actually generate a 5th attack, which might be more beneficial than just a bit more power on one column. Now another card that we got is this grade 2, Charming Smile Cecilia, and Cecilia has the effect, although when unit's placed on the rearguard circle from hand, if you have 3 or more other rearguards, so again you need to have 4 rearguards in this case, cost counter plus 1 and draw a card. Usually I'm okay with counter plus 1 to draw a card, but in this instance it's only going to be a 2-star card because its restriction is kind of annoying. You need to have 4 or more other cards, which is not that ideal in certain instances, and she's also 9k base. Why is she 9k base? I don't understand this. Like, it's the thing within Lyrical Monasterio, but it doesn't help her case. So, yeah, she's for me a 2-star card. I think the value is still solid, but the restriction can make her a bit annoying in certain instances. Now, if we go back to the statement that I just made, that we might want to promote more multi-tech instead of big powers, one of those cards that actually enables that is this grade 1 Munching girl Seeya. Yes, she is also a 3k base, but she's honestly not that bad, because she has the skill, although when unit's placed on the rearguard circle, cost Solas 1, look the top card of your deck, call to an open rearguard circle, or put it into your hand. If you put a card into your hand, choose a card from your hand and discard it. So either this is a +1 on the board, or it's a cycle. In most instances, you're gonna call to the field because that gives you more value, and if you do this during a Kairi turn, this can help you to achieve 5 attacks, because this can be one of the cards you call in the back row, and if you open up your front row circles with one of the ghosty cards, for example, or maybe even the grade 2 that can give you resource that we talked about in part 1, you can then call the top card of your deck to that open circle and generate an extra attack, which is actually really good. But the fact that this card also is very generically useful in other decks makes this card for me a solid 4-star card. This is effectively the overdressed equivalent of Lieselot. Now, Lieselot was definitely a 5-star card, maybe even a 6-star card if I'm gonna be honest. But the reason why this is not as high is because this card is less value because it's not free, and it's also not on just a generic 10k body of a grade 2. So they balance this card to make it a bit more fair than Lieselot is. Now, interesting enough, we also got a grade 2, which is very similar to this card, as we got Precise Word Sense Floor. And Floor is the effect, although when the unit's placed on the rearguard circle from hand, reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's a non-grade 2 unit card, call to an open rearguard circle. If you could not call a card, put the revealed card on the bottom of your deck. This is similar to the grade 1 that you just talked about, only this is going to be a 3-star card for a couple of reasons. One, we cannot add the card to our hand if we do not want to call it, so it's less flexible. And there's also less targets to call, because now it also needs to be specifically a non-grade 2, whereas the grade 1 can call a grade 1, 2, or 3, which is much more targets to hit. In this case, we can only hit a grade 1 or grade 3, which can be annoying. And on top of it, this is a grade 2, which means it needs to be the attacker instead of the grade 1 that can be called to the back row. And she's 6k. 6k is really awkward and really annoying number to actually get something out of it. So this is mainly here for a potential extender, but that's it. Like, there are more flaws to this particular card that doesn't favor it, so that's why it's for me a 3-star card. There's still value to be had, but there's definitely more negative downsides to it. Now, interesting enough, we have also a grade 3, which is somewhat similar, but at least gives more consistent value, as we've got this grade 3, Wish Granted by Duo Melia, and this is an 11k base. Not as much of a problem, but her ability is auto when the unit plays on a rearguard circle. Cost, counter +1, search your deck for up to 1 Dreaming Eyes Emmeline, call to an open rearguard circle, and shuffle your deck. So remember the grade 1 that we just talked about that can become a 12k body? This is the grade 3 that searches that one out. And this is the reason why that grade 1 might actually be useful, because if this is one of the targets you call with Kairi, you can then use its effect to counter +1 and to call the grade 1 as a 12k attacker to the other column if you can open up the front row rearguard circle slot. So that's actually pretty decent. Or you could call the grade 1 in the back row behind this, and then you have a 23k column, because that's 12 plus 11, 23, which is a good number to hit. So there is flexibility here. It's not the greatest of value, but could come up here and there. So I think it's an alright 3-star card that could also become an engine for a budget archetype as well. So there's more than meets the eye here. And then for the final card that we're going to talk about today is the main support card for Kairi, because this is the only card that actually specifically states the name of Kairi in the skill, as we've got this grade 2, Talented and Elegant Elis. And Elis has the effect auto rearguard circle. When this unit is boosted, if your Vanguard is SSI's Kairi, cost, counter +1, choose up to 1 card from your hand and call it to an open rearguard circle. So this is actually really good, because this card not only achieves multi-tags, but this card actually allows us to achieve more than 5 multi-tags. Because what you can do is, if we have one of the ghosty cards or one of the other cards that can clear themselves, we can attack with them, they clear themselves, then we attack with Elis as a being boosted, use your skill to call another one of those cards that can clear themselves to the board, attack with that, now we attack with Kairi, bounce back Elis and the booster behind her, then we call Elis and then a booster behind her that can hopefully call another card, so aka the grade 1 that calls the top card of the deck, and if we're super lucky and that card can clear itself, that was on the top of her deck, we can attack with it, clears itself, attack with Elis once again, and then call another card from a hand to the field and attack again. That's pretty good, because that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 attacks. It cost us 1 or 2 soul, and it cost us 3 counterblast. Now, that's a lot of counterblast, but if we can kill our opponent that turn or cripple their resources, I would say that's worth it. And also, don't forget, one of those cards that can clear themselves actually can countercharge. So we can even negate some of the counterblast costs as well. So I would say that's pretty good. So overall, at least to me, is a solid 4-star card. Now, it's not a 5-star card because this is still pretty restricted. It's reliant on a lot of things to go right. 1, we need the counterblast, of course. 2, we need it's only restricted to Kairi, so it's limited. And 3, we need to have other cards that can clear themselves on the board to actually generate the value with Elis. So if we do not have those other cards, then Elis becomes kind of a useless cards, I wouldn't say. It all comes down to how the skills play out and what you really want to do with it. But overall, I think it's a solid 4-star card for Kairi's engine as a whole. And with that said, we covered all the cards for the Kairi ride line as well as Feltyrosa. So these were the decks that focused around multi-attacking by disappearing their field and calling new cards either from hand or, in Feltyrosa's case, from the top of her deck with her drive checks. Now, overall, these plays are very interesting and probably the most favored among a lot of players out there because the multi-attack shenanigans are really interesting. Now, they aren't the strongest within Lyrical Monasterio. There are other ride lines that are much stronger, but in comparison to these ride lines and these playstyles, they are much more restrictive and more linear, whereas these playstyles are more flexible and more random, where it then results in every game feeling a little bit different than playing the same riddle all over again every single game. But that said, I'm very curious what you guys think of these cards. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of the support cards and the right lines for Feltyrosa as well as Kairi. And do you guys agree or disagree with my ratings? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over patreon.com/FingerinSider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/FingerinSider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!